Chapter 1. The Mysterious Death at Belvoir House. The night was thick with the murmur of a coming storm, as the wealthy, picturesque Belvoir House stood against the darkened skyline. The grand estate, nestled amidst sprawling lawns and elegant gardens, was a perfect reflection of the aristocratic families that once called it home tonight. However, it was a place of whispers and strained silences, for within its stately walls a crime had been committed, a crime that would challenge even the remarkable abilities of Hercule Poirot. At a lavish soirée held in the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was electric, filled with the laughter and light chatter of the well-to-do, the hostess, the widowed Mrs. Augusta Warrington, a woman of striking beauty and undeniable grace, moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had known both tragedy and triumph in equal measure. Her second marriage had been celebrated by many a union of great wealth and prestige, with Sir Edmund Forington, a retired colonel, who had been described by some as a man of noble character, if not slightly mysterious, yet beneath the surface of what appeared to be a flawless evening. A deep tension lingered as the evening wore on. The guests continued to drink, dance, and enjoy their sumptuous surroundings. The night seemed destined for an easy conclusion, until a piercing scream shattered the merry sounds of celebration. The scream came from the direction of the library, a room seldom used, filled with ancient volumes and the scent of old leather-bound books. Panic rippled through the crowd as one of the guests, Mrs. Warrington's personal maid, rushed from the library, her face white as a sheet-master. "Forthington, Sir Edmund, he is dead," she gasped. "Dead by his own hand in the study." Instantly the atmosphere shifted from jubilant to horrified. Guests spilled into the hallways, some rushing towards the library, others frantically calling for help. The authorities were summoned, and soon after the local inspector arrived, his face solemn, as he took in the grim scene. Sir Edmund Forington lay slumped in the study, a pistol at his side and his face contorted in an expression of deep agony. The first examination suggested a suicide, but something about the scene did not sit right with the authorities. No note, no clear motive. Just a wealthy man at the peak of his life, found dead in his study. The inspector's immediate conclusion was that it was a straightforward case of suicide. A tragic end to a man who had reportedly been suffering from depression after his marriage. Yet this conclusion did not sit well with Mrs. Warrington, whose distress seemed genuine, but whose grief was marred by something more elusive. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as if searching for something or someone, before she quietly whispered, "It cannot be, it must not be." It was then that the renowned Belgian detective Hercule Poirot made his entrance, a figure of refinement, precision, and undeniable presence, whose sharp eyes scanned the room. With a quiet intensity, he had been a guest at the soirée, though none had expected him to be more than a silent observer. But now, as the grim realization of the crime sunk in Poirot's mind, was already at work, his meticulous steps led him toward the body, his gloved hands poised as he examined the pistol with the grace of a surgeon. "Mon ami, this is no simple matter," Poirot said to Inspector Jackson, his tone polite but firm. "A great deal of mystery surrounds this scene, and I believe there are many secrets yet to be uncovered." Turning his attention to Mrs. Warrington, Poirot gave her a measured look. "Madam, your distress is understandable, but it would be wise to remember that appearances are often deceiving you. Have a second husband now. Do you believe his death to be an accident or something more deliberate?" Mrs. Warrington stiffened at his words, her face growing paler. I do not know, but I cannot believe he would take his life." Pooh raised an eyebrow, his gaze piercing. "That, madam, is why you have called me, n'est-ce pas? To see the truth beneath the surface, to find what lies hidden in this house of secrets." And so the investigation began, not with grandiose declarations, but with the quiet, methodical approach that Pooh had perfected over his many years as a detective. Every detail mattered. The contradictions, the motives, the hidden truths beneath the surface. Pooh would soon discover that every guest in Belvoir House had something to hide, and only he, with his little grey cells, would untangle the web of lies that bound them all together, certainly, to ensure the narrative flows seamlessly and remains engaging. I'll continue with Chapter 2 of Hercule Poirot and the widow's second husband. This chapter will delve deeper into the investigation, introducing more characters, unraveling initial mysteries, and setting the stage for the psychological elements of the story. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. The following morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a thick fog that clung to the grounds of Belvoir House, like a veil obscuring the once majestic landscape. The morning sun struggled through the mist, casting eerie, ghost-like shadows across the estate. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Guests, once sparkling with the excitement of the evening, now moved through the house with the quiet uncertainty of those who had witnessed something terrible. Hercule Poirot stood by the window of the study where Sir Edmund had been found, his hands folded neatly behind his back, as he examined the room with the precision of a watchmaker inspecting a delicate timepiece. The room itself was typical of a man of Sir Edmund's station. Rich oak panelling, a large mahogany desk cluttered with papers, and a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf filled with military books, journals, and a few titles on obscure philosophical musings. The inn-body had already been removed, but the sense of the tragedy still lingered in the air. Thickening the silence, Poirot turned to Inspector Jackson, who stood near the doorway taking notes in his notebook. "Well, mon ami, what do you make of it?" Poirot asked, his tone calm, but filled with the kind of curiosity that only the greatest detectives possess. Inspector Jackson closed his notebook with a snap, his brow furrowed in thought. "The evidence points to suicide, Poirot. The pistol is a .38 caliber revolver. It's registered to Sir Edmund. The angle of the wound suggests he shot himself. We found a letter opener on his desk, but that could simply be a coincidence. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication of a struggle." Poirot raised his hand, stopping the inspector mid-sentence. But this is where your mind is failing you. Mon cher, you focus on the physical evidence. But there is something far more important, that you overlook, something psychological. What is it, I wonder, that does not add up, Inspector? Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean?" Poirot's sharp eyes swept the room again, as if to say, "You should see it too. This room, it is orderly. Yes, but there is a slight incongruity in the arrangement of the furniture. The small items on the desk. You see Sir Edmund's desk. It has a very specific pattern to it, one of order and precision. But these papers scattered across the top, they are not the way he would leave them. This is a man who prided himself on control, on discipline. Do you believe that he would leave his office in such a state? Jackson's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see your point, but we still have to consider that it could be suicide." Poe gave a small sigh, his moustache twitching slightly. "Indeed, Inspector, but I do not believe this is the whole picture. What we must do is gather the facts. Each piece of information will lead us to the truth. And for that we must speak with the others. We must look at their motivations, their actions. The mind is a tricky thing, and it does not always follow the path that one expects." The door to the study opened then, and Mrs. Augusta Warrington entered her steps, faltering slightly as she caught sight of Poirot. She had been up all night, her face pale from lack of sleep, her eyes red from the tears she had shed. Yet there was something beneath her grief, a flicker of unease that Poirot did not fail to notice. "Mr. Poirot," she said softly, her voice trembling, "is there any news? Have you learned anything yet? Is it truly suicide?" Poirot turned to face her, his eyes warm yet calculating. "Madam, I wish I could tell you what you wish to hear, but as of now I have learned little. The facts are still unclear." Her lips trembled and she took a step forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You do not think he could have done it, do you, Edmund? He was not that kind of man." He was a gentle soul. Poirot did not immediately respond. He studied her carefully, taking in every tiny gesture, every detail that might hint at something deeper. Her distress seemed genuine, but there was something in the way she spoke, something in her eyes that suggested a hidden truth. One she was unwilling to reveal. "No, madam," Poirot replied after a long moment, his voice gentle but firm. "I do not believe that Sir Edmund took his own life, but there is much I need to learn, and for that I must speak to those who are closest to him. We must gather the suspects." With a wave of his hand, Poirot gestured towards the adjoining room. Mrs. Warrington followed him reluctantly, and the pair entered the drawing-room where the remaining guests had been gathered. The large room was still, the air heavy with the weight of suspicion. All eyes turned toward Poirot as he entered, each guest eager yet apprehensive to face the detective, who would surely unravel the mysteries they wished to keep buried. Poirot's gaze moved swiftly over the group, his mind already at work. The guests consisted of a mixture of old acquaintances and new faces, some more familiar to Mrs. Warrington than others. There was Charles Abernathy, a wealthy landowner with a penchant for fine wines and faster horses, his wife Beatrice, a woman of striking beauty, whose charms seemed to veil a deeper bitterness, Colonel Henry Fulner, an old military companion of Sir Edmund's, who had never quite forgiven him for their differences during the war. And lastly, there was the enigmatic Eleanor Birch, a young woman with a mysterious past, who had been seen in whispered conversation with Sir Edmund on several occasions. Poirot observed each of them for a moment longer before speaking, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his French accent smooth and commanding, "I must first offer my condolences. A tragedy has occurred, and one of you is no doubt responsible. It is my task to uncover the truth, and in order to do so, I will need your cooperation. We will begin by asking each of you to tell me where you were when Sir Edmund was found dead." A murmur of unease passed through the group, as each guest exchanged wary glances. Poirot took no notice, his attention entirely focused on the individuals in front of him. "Let us begin with you, Mr. Abernathy Poirot," said, his eyes locking onto the man, with a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through him. "Where were you when the discovery was made?" Abernathy, who had been nervously tapping his fingers on the armrest of his chair, shifted uncomfortably. "I was in the library, he said with a slightly exaggerated calmness. "I was reading." "Reading?" Poirot repeated slowly, his voice measured. "And what were you reading, may I ask?" Abernathy hesitated for a moment. "A book about military strategy." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he listened to the man's words. He had not expected this response to be so precise, so calculated. There was something odd about the way Abernathy spoke, something forced. As Poirot's gaze lingered, Abernathy shifted in his seat once more, his eyes flicking toward the door. "I see," Poirot said softly. "And what time did you leave the library, Mr. Abernathy?" I was there until just before the scream," Abernathy stammered. "I do not know exactly what time it was, but I was just about to leave when I heard the commotion." Nodded, as if considering his words carefully. "Very well, let us move on to you, Madam Abernathy. Where were you when Sir Edmund was found?" Beatrice Abernathy, a woman whose beauty seemed to hold a certain coldness, met Poirot's gaze with an unsettling calm. "I was in my room," she replied smoothly, her voice betraying no emotion. "I had retired for the night early. I was feeling rather unwell." Poirot raised an eyebrow at her claim. "Unwell, you say? Yet you appear perfectly well." Now her lips twitched the faintest of smiles, playing at the corners of her mouth. "I am quite capable of handling myself, Mr. Poirot. If you wish to investigate further, you may." Poirot was about to speak, when he was interrupted by the sudden entrance of Colonel Fulner. His face flushed with anger. "Enough of this nonsense," Poirot Falconer bellowed. "Sir Edmund was a man of honor. I will not stand here while you accuse us all of murder." Poirot raised a hand to calm him, his expression unshaken. "Colonel, please, I accuse no one. I am merely seeking the truth. If you are innocent, then you have nothing to fear." Fulner glared at him, but Poirot could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. At that moment the door to the drawing-room opened once more, and Eleanor Birch stepped inside, her face pale and eyes darting nervously. I need to speak to Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice trembling. Poirot turned his gaze toward her, sensing that this young woman held the key to something critical, as the others fell silent. The detective knew that the game had only just begun. Chapter 3. The unraveling threads. The heavy fog of the morning had given way to a crisp afternoon, but the oppressive atmosphere inside Belvoir House remained unchanged. Despite the chilling distance between the rooms, the very air seemed thick with unspoken words, with the lingering scent of tragedy that clung to everything. Hercule Poirot, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the assembled guests, understood well that the facade of politeness and decorum in the room was little more than a thin veil over the undercurrents of suspicion and fear that lay beneath. As Mrs. Augusta Warrington entered the drawing-room, still visibly distressed by the death of her husband, Poirot took in her appearance carefully. She was once a woman full of life and charm, but now her posture was slightly hunched, as if the weight of her grief, or perhaps guilt, was more than she could bear. She had been the one to call upon Poirot in the first place, and it was clear that she was as much in need of answers as she was of comfort. Mr. Poirot. She greeted him with a tremor in her voice. "I trust you have learned more of what happened to Edmund." Poirot studied her closely. He had already made several observations about her behavior, but something about the way she spoke now gave him pause. There was an almost mechanical quality to her voice, as though she were trying too hard to appear genuinely distressed. Her eyes darted from one guest to another, lingering just a moment too long on Colonel Fulner before returning to Poirot. "I regret to inform you, madam." Poirot replied, his voice calm yet firm, "that I have learned little beyond the initial facts. Sir Edmund's death was, I believe, not a suicide, as we have already discussed, but the circumstances surrounding it remain elusive." She nodded, her fingers clasped tightly in front of her, betraying the tension she felt. But who could have done such a thing? Edmund had no enemies. He was a man of honor, a good man, a man who Poirot raised a hand, signaling for silence. His eyes were sharp, like a hawk scanning for its next prey. "Madam, allow me to ask you a question. Did Sir Edmund ever mention any threats, any enemies he feared, or any conflicts that troubled him deeply?" Mrs. Warrington's gaze faltered for a brief moment before she met his eyes again, and hesitated, clearly struggling to formulate her thoughts. "No, not exactly." But she trailed off, and Poirot could see her mind racing. There were whispers among the staff, among the guests. Sir Edmund was always a private man, and there were certain things he would not speak of. He was a soldier, you know, and soldiers are haunted by their pasts. Poirot nodded slowly. "The war," he mused. "Ah, yes, always the war. It shapes men in ways they are unwilling to speak of, but the shadow it casts lingers long after the battles have ended." Before Mrs. Warrington could respond, Colonel Fulner's voice cut through the tension in the room. Like a thunderclap, enough of this falconer stormed forward. His face flushed with anger. "You cannot accuse Sir Edmund of being haunted by shadows from the past. He was a man of strength. He was a man of integrity." Poirot turned his sharp gaze on the colonel, unflinching in the face of his outburst. "Mr. Fulner, I do not accuse anyone. I ask questions, and I seek answers. That is the nature of my work. But if you believe that Sir Edmund was a man above reproach, I urge you to reconsider. Even the most honorable men have their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities." Fulner's fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing more. The tension in the room had risen several notches, and Poirot could feel the weight of each person's gaze upon him. They were all watching, waiting to see how the detective would proceed. "Very well." Poirot continued, his voice still steady and controlled. "Let us return to the matter at hand. The facts are clear. Sir Edmund was found dead in his study with a gunshot wound to the head. The weapon, a registered .38 caliber revolver, was found beside him. No signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle. The window was closed and the door locked. The only sound, we are told, was the scream of Mrs. Warrington. When she entered the room, Mrs. Warrington visibly stiffened at the mention of the scream, her fingers twitching nervously. "You say the weapon was registered to Sir Edmund?" asked. "It was a suicide." Poirot looked at the inspector with a small, inscrutable smile. "Ah, mon ami, that is the question. N'est-ce pas? The weapon is registered to Sir Edmund, and the circumstances would suggest that it might have been his own hand that pulled the trigger. but I cannot dismiss one simple fact. Too many elements do not align, and that is why I suspect foul play." There was a moment of silence as the others absorbed Poirot's words. Mrs. Warrington, however, was not so convinced. She stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her voice trembling as she spoke. But who would want to harm Edmund? He was loved by everyone. His friends, his colleagues, even the staff here at Belvoir House. Why would anyone want to kill him? Her eyes searched the room as if she were pleading with them all to give her an answer. Poirot turned his gaze back to her. His voice, soft yet resolute. "Madame, as I have said, the truth is often hidden in plain sight. People lie to themselves before they lie to others, and it is their own fears and desires that often lead them into committing such acts. But we must consider every possibility." He turned his attention to the others in the room, each of them observing him closely. "Now let us examine the people closest to Sir Edmund, his wife, his friends, and his colleagues. Each of them had their own relationship with him, but there is one thing that unites them all. They all had something to gain from his death." Inspector Jackson raised an eyebrow at this, clearly intrigued by Poirot's assertion. "Are you suggesting that someone—" Falconer's eyes narrowed slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "I told you, Poirot, Sir Edmund and I had a difference of opinion over the business dealings. It was nothing more." And yet, Poirot continued, "you seemed to hesitate when I asked you about the specifics. Why, if it were so trivial, would it not be easy for you to tell me the nature of the dispute?" There was a flicker of something in Fulner's eyes, a momentary lapse in control. Poirot caught it immediately. "I have told you everything that is necessary." Fulner snapped, "There is no reason to believe otherwise." Poirot didn't respond immediately, but instead leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him. He observed the Colonel with unblinking eyes. He was not ready to let Fulner off so easily. "Ah, but you see, Colonel," Poirot said, his voice soft, "it is precisely in the details that the truth lies. A person who is hiding something, no matter how slight, reveals much more through their avoidance of certain questions than they do through their answers. And I wonder, Colonel, what it is that you are avoiding." Fulner shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with Poirot's piercing gaze. "I am not avoiding anything," he muttered, but Poirot could tell that his words held little conviction. Pugh's eyes did not waver. "Then perhaps you would be so kind as to explain the nature of your financial relationship with Sir Edmund." "I do not believe it was purely professional." No, for the first time Faulkner's face lost its colour. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then said nothing. Watched the silence stretch out for several moments before the Colonel stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I am done." "Here, Poirot," Fulner said, his tone clipped. "You may believe what you will, but there is nothing more to say." Poirot said nothing as Fulner left the room, but his thoughts were already running ahead. Fulner was hiding something, that much was clear. There was more to this military man than he let on. But the question was what? After a brief pause, Poirot turned to his next suspect, Miss Caroline Williams. Miss Williams had been a quiet but ever watchful presence during the earlier discussions, and Poirot was eager to see how her calm demeanour would fare under questioning. She entered Poirot's study with the same composed elegance she had exhibited during their previous meeting. Poirot offered her a seat, his eyes never leaving her face. Miss Williams, Poirot began, "You have been most calm throughout all of this. It is as if nothing can disturb you, even the murder of your dear friend." Miss Williams smiled faintly, though the smile did not reach her eyes. One must remain calm in times of crisis. Miss Poirot emotions rarely serve to solve anything. Poirot nodded slowly indeed. But one must ask Miss Williams why you are so certain of that. Why, when everyone else is on edge, do you appear untouched? She blinked, surprised by the directness of his question. "I beg your pardon, Poirot, but I do not understand what you mean." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "I mean that you, Miss Williams, are behaving in a manner that seems detached. You claim to be a lifelong friend of Sir Edmund, but yet your actions suggest that you are unaffected by his death. How do you explain that?" For a long moment there was silence in the room. Miss Williams' eyes flashed with something. Whether it was anger, embarrassment, or something else, Poirot could not immediately tell. "Sir Edmund was a proud man," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "He would not have wanted his friends to display their grief openly. I respect his wishes." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "But that is an interesting response. You are suggesting that his wishes should govern your behavior. And yet what of your own emotions? I do not believe for 1 second that you are untouched by this tragedy. You are merely hiding it well, as you have hidden something else." Miss Williams flinched, though she quickly masked it with a forced calmness. "I have nothing to hide," she said. The words almost too rehearsed. Poirot leaned back his fingers, tapping lightly on the arm of his chair. "I do not believe you, Miss Williams. There is more beneath the surface, much more." Miss Williams's eyes narrowed. "You have no right to accuse me of anything, Poirot." Coo held up his hands, a gesture of peace. "I accuse no one, Miss Williams. I merely observe. And when one observes, one sees the truth. That others wish to remain hidden. Perhaps in time you will reveal it to me yourself." She stood abruptly, her expression hardening into one of cold indifference. "I am finished here," as she left the room. Poirot was left with more questions than answers. Miss Williams was hiding something, but what she had an unusual way of avoiding emotional involvement, even though it was clear that Sir Edmund's death had affected her deeply. That much was evident in her eyes. In this room might be involved. "Ah," Inspector Poirot said, lifting a finger to his lips as if to hush him. "The truth is not so easily discovered, but I believe we have seen one thing quite clearly. Each of the suspects in this case has a reason to want Sir Edmund out of the way. The question is who among them would have had the means, the motive, and the opportunity at this." He turned to Colonel Fulner. "Mr. Fulner, you have known Sir Edmund for many years, I believe. Tell me, did you ever have any disagreements with him?" His face flushed crimson at the suggestion, and he looked as though he might protest. But Poirot's steady gaze held him in place. "There were disagreements," Fulner admitted, his voice tight, "but nothing that would drive me to murder Edmund and I. We were old friends, we had our differences, but we respected each other. I would never have done such a thing." Poirot nodded slowly, taking in the Colonel's response. "And yet, Fulner, we are told that you were the one who discovered Sir Edmund's body. You arrived in the study just after the crime took place, and you were the one to call for help. Tell me, why did you not investigate the room more thoroughly before calling for assistance?" Falconer's expression tightened his gaze, flickering momentarily toward Mrs. Warrington before he spoke. "I did not think there was any need for further investigation. I thought it was clear he had taken his own life." Poirot studied him carefully. "Ah, but here is where you are mistaken, Colonel. You see, there are details that speak to the contrary. A locked room, no sign of a struggle. And yet the gun was found at an angle that suggests it was not placed there by the victim himself. The angle of the shot, it does not add up." Mrs. Warrington's eyes widened as she took in this new piece of information. "What do you mean, Mr. Poirot? Are you suggesting that Sir Edmund did not take his own life?" Poirot gave a small enigmatic smile. "I suggest only that you consider the possibility it is not as clear as it may seem. There are things hidden in the shadows, and it is my job to uncover them." He turned back to the others in the room, his sharp eyes scanning each of them in turn. "Let us move on. We must ask ourselves who benefits the most from Sir Edmund's death, who had the most to gain from his passing. The answers are often found in the motivations of those closest to the victim." Mrs. Warrington visibly recoiled at the suggestion, but Colonel Faulkner did not seem to take offence. Instead, he looked thoughtful as though he were weighing the possibilities in his mind, then turned his attention to the rest of the room. "And then what of the others? What of Miss Caroline Williams, Sir Edmund's long-time friend and confidant, or Mr. Samuel Bryce, the business partner with whom Sir Edmund had been working closely in recent weeks? I suggest you consider each of them closely, for none of them is as innocent as they appear." The tension in the room thickened, and the air seemed to grow colder as Poirot's words lingered. Everyone in the room, it seemed, was hiding something, and Poirot had already begun to see the cracks in their facades. Chapter 4. The Hidden Clue. The morning after the tense meeting with the suspects, Hercule Poirot remained as vigilant as ever, turning over the puzzle of Sir Edmund Warrington's death in his mind. There were still many pieces to place, and the scent of mystery lingered thickly in the air. His little grey cells hummed with activity. Each movement of the suspects, each fragment of conversation from the interviews, all weaving together into something more complex. But what that was the question, and Poirot would not rest until the answer was revealed at breakfast. The other residents of Belvoir House were noticeably quieter, their nervous energy palpable. Poirot, for his part, appeared calm and composed, though his mind raced with possibilities. After the formalities of the meal, he asked to speak with each of the remaining suspects individually. Colonel Faulkner was the first to arrive at Poirot's study. The colonel's demeanour was as stiff as ever, his military bearing evident even in his mannerisms. He stood with his back straight, the epitome of controlled composure. "Now, please sit," Poirot invited, gesturing to the chair across from him. Faulkner lowered himself slowly, his posture unwavering. Poirot wasted no time in getting to the point. "Colonel, I have been reflecting upon our conversation yesterday. There is something I do not understand about your relationship with Sir Edmund. You spoke of old disagreements, but in the way you spoke, it was as if the disagreements were more recent, more pressing. Is that not true? But was it guilt, grief, or something more?" Poirot had one final meeting scheduled for the day. Mr. Samuel Bryce had been quiet during the previous interviews, and his nervous fidgeting had caught Poirot's attention. Bryce entered the study with an air of unease, wringing his hands and avoiding direct eye contact. Poirot watched him closely, sensing an opportunity to uncover more. "Mr. Bryce," Poirot began, "you appear to be uncomfortable. Is something troubling you?" Bryce stammered slightly. "No, not at all. Miss Poirot, just the weight of the situation, you understand?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Of course. But tell me, Mr. Bryce, you were Sir Edmund's business partner, were you not?" Yes, that's right," Bryce said quickly, his eyes darting around the room. "And yet," Poirot continued, "I understand that there was a disagreement between the two of you, something to do with your business venture. I believe." Face grew pale. No disagreement. Everything was fine. Everything was going according to plan." Pew didn't respond immediately, but instead studied Bryce with an intensity that made the man squirm. After a few moments, Poirot asked, "Then why did Sir Edmund need such a large sum of money? Surely a man in your business would have no trouble securing a loan or an investor. Why was it that Sir Edmund felt the need to ask you for help?" Bryce swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know," he muttered. "He never told me he was in any kind of trouble." Poirot leaned in closer. "But I think you know more than you are letting on, Mr. Bryce. You see, I believe that you and Sir Edmund were more than just business partners. There was something more, something hidden beneath the surface. You were not simply colleagues. You were something else." Bryce's face wrinkled, and he fidgeted nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." His eyes glittered with the certainty of his deductions. "Perhaps you do not, Mr. Bryce, but I do. And soon you will be forced to reveal the truth." Chapter 5. The final thread. The night had descended over Belvoir House. A house that once felt so inviting, now cloaked in an oppressive silence. The guests had retired to their rooms, each locked away in their own thoughts. Poirot, however, did not rest his mind, sharp as a blade word, with all the fragmented pieces he had collected. The mystery of Sir Edmund Warrington's death had not yet revealed its final layer. But the Belgian detective knew that every thread in the tapestry was intricately connected. Hercule Poirot was accustomed to working late into the night, and tonight was no different. With his customary precision, he had reviewed his notes, scrutinized each interview, and observed the suspects as they interacted with one another. Nothing escaped his watchful eyes. The very fabric of the puzzle he was solving seemed to twist and shift. But Poirot was determined to find the solution, no matter how tangled the threads became. The room where Poirot had chosen to conduct his investigations was dimly lit, with the heavy curtains drawn, and the only light coming from a single lamp on his desk. The atmosphere was heavy, as though even the air was waiting for a revelation. He pored over the details one more time. Fulner's military demeanor, Williams's detached calm, Bryce's nervous fidgeting. It all pointed to something more than met the eye. Poirot's fingers paused on the last piece of his notes, the one that seemed to have eluded him all along. His attention was drawn once more to the financial dealings between Sir Edmund and Mr. Bryce. He had learned that the two men had been involved in a questionable business venture, one that was riddled with secrecy and hidden debts. But why had Bryce been so nervous during their conversation? Why had Williams shown signs of avoiding the subject of Sir Edmund's financial troubles? And what of Colonel Fulner? His sudden anger, his desire to avoid discussing the true nature of his relationship with Sir Edmund, it could not be ignored. There was something important there, something at the core of the murder. But Poirot had yet to uncover the full truth. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock at the door. He looked up, his sharp eyes immediately noticing the slight shift in the atmosphere. It was a subtle thing, but Poirot's intuition told him that this visit was important. Come in. He called, his voice steady. The door creaked open, and in walked Miss Caroline Williams, her movements deliberate but cautious. She closed the door behind her with a soft click, then turned to face Poirot. Her expression was unreadable, though her eyes were darker than before, as though weighed down by some unseen burden. Poirot motioned for her to take a seat, and she did so without a word, her gaze flickering to the papers on his desk before returning to meet his eyes. Miss Williams Poirot began his tone to meet his eyes. Miss Williams Poirot began his tone measured. You are looking troubled. This evening is something on your mind. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke, her voice low. You have been very thorough in your investigation. Mr. Poirot, too thorough. Perhaps I cannot help but feel that you are closing in on something. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled. But my dear Miss Williams, it is not that I am closing in on something. It is that the truth always comes to light, no matter how cleverly it is concealed. You see, everyone here has something to hide, but it is in the little details, the small contradictions, that the truth begins to reveal itself. She sighed as though the weight of the world was pressing on her. You are correct, she said softly. There is something I have been hiding, something that I have not shared with you or anyone else. Poirot's heart quickened, but he remained outwardly composed. Please, Miss Williams, tell me what troubles you. The truth is the only path to resolution. You will find no judgment here, only understanding. For a long moment Miss Williams remained silent, her fingers clenched tightly in her lap. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. It was Sir Edmund's business dealings. With Mr. Bryce, she confessed they were not merely business partners. They were involved in something much more personal. Pugh's eyes narrowed slightly. Personal? How so? She swallowed hard, as though the words were difficult to speak. I knew Sir Edmund had been in trouble financially and emotionally, but I didn't know the full extent of it. Mr. Bryce had promised Sir Edmund that he could help him out of his financial predicament. If only Sir Edmund agreed to certain terms. Poirot's mind was already racing, piecing together the fragment terms. He repeated, his voice steady. What terms? Miss Williams, her voice trembled as she spoke. Sir Edmund agreed to invest in a scheme that would give Bryce complete control over his assets. It was all done secrecy, away from the knowledge of anyone else, including his closest friends. But Bryce, he had more in mind than just money. Sir Edmund had fallen into something much deeper than mere financial ruin. Poirot could feel the weight of her words, though he did not let it show. He was processing, analyzing. There was a hidden connection here, something that involved more than just money. It involved power. But how did this fit into the bigger picture? And what did it mean for the death of Sir Edmund? What you are telling me, Miss Williams, Poirot said, his voice measured, is that Mr. Bryce was not simply looking for financial gain. He was looking for something else, something far more dangerous. But why would Sir Edmund agree to such a proposition? What was in it for him? Miss Williams hesitated once more, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for the right words. I believe Sir Edmund thought that Bryce could help him get out of a bind. But the truth was, Bryce was using Sir Edmund to secure his own future. He had no intention of helping him. He only wanted control. Poirot absorbed this information carefully. It was a critical piece of the puzzle, but something still did not sit right. Why had Bryce killed Sir Edmund? Was it because Sir Edmund had begun to resist the manipulation? Or was there another darker motive at play? Miss Williams, Poirot said, his voice firm. There is more you are not telling me. You know something else, do you not? Her eyes flickered nervously, and for a moment Poirot thought she might retract her confession. But then she nodded almost imperceptibly. There is one more thing Sir Edmund had recently discovered. Something about Bryce, something that could destroy him. Poirot leaned forward, his mind racing. What was it? She met his gaze for the first time, and in that moment Poirot saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. I don't know all the details, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But Sir Edmund had uncovered something about Bryce's past, something that could ruin him. That's why Bryce had to act quickly. Sir Edmund had to be silenced before he could expose the truth. Poirot absorbed the information, then nodded slowly. This is very important, Miss Williams. You have given me the key to understanding Bryce's motive. But I must ask you now, did you know that Bryce was capable of murder? Miss Williams's eyes widened in shock. Murder? She repeated, her voice trembling. You think Bryce killed Sir Edmund? Poe did not answer immediately. He stood up, pacing slowly across the room. His mind was racing, connecting the dots. Bryce had been in a dangerous position. He had much to lose, but there were still too many unanswered questions. Poe turned back to Miss Williams, his expression hardening. You must not speak of this to anyone. It is crucial that you remain silent for now. We cannot let Bryce know that we are aware of his secret. Miss Williams nodded, her face pale. I understand. Poe walked to the door and opened it, signaling that the conversation was over. Thank you for your candor, Miss Williams. You have helped me more than you know. As Miss Williams left the room, Poirot returned to his desk, his mind already working to piece together the final parts of the puzzle. Bryce's financial manipulation of Sir Edmund, his hidden secrets, the murder. It was all coming into focus. But there was still one final piece to uncover. Poe would find it, of that he was certain. Chapter 6. The unravelling of crisp autumn morning sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains of the study. Where Poirot sat alone with his thoughts, the house had fallen into a stillness after the previous night's tense exchange with Miss Caroline Williams. Her confession about Sir Edmund's relationship with Mr. Bryce had unveiled a hidden layer to the mystery, but it had also raised more questions than it had answered. Poirot's mind raced, running through every detail. No matter how small, his mind, sharp and meticulous, would not rest until every question had been resolved. It was clear that Bryce was at the center of this complex web, but why had Sir Edmund been so careful in his dealings with him? And what was the secret? Bryce was hiding a secret so grave that it could destroy him. These questions gnawed at Poirot's mind as he sat lost in thought. The ticking of the big grandfather clock broke the silence, and Poirot, ever the meticulous observer, glanced up at the time. It was nearing midday. He had already summoned the remaining guests for one final meeting. The time had come for the truth to be laid bare. The guests, assembled in the grand dining room, their faces reflecting a mixture of nervous anticipation and suppressed curiosity. Colonel Fowler stood by the window, gazing out over the sprawling grounds of Belvoir House. His stiff posture was a clear indication of his unease, though he made no effort to acknowledge Poirot's arrival. Mr. Bryce and Miss Williams had arrived shortly before him, and though Miss Williams seemed composed, her eyes darted nervously toward the detective. Bryce, on the other hand, seemed to exude a calm confidence, though there was something almost too controlled about his demeanor. Poirot took his seat at the head of the table, his sharp eyes scanning the room, noting each person's body language. The tension was palpable, and Poirot could feel it in the air. He had already gathered enough pieces of the puzzle to know that a confrontation was coming, and it would be a dangerous one. Madame Zupur began, his voice calm and measured. We have reached the point where the truth must be revealed. Sir Edmund Warrington is dead, but his death is not the end of the story. No, it is only the beginning of the tale that lies hidden beneath the surface. We are all here to unravel that tale. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. He could see the flicker of discomfort in Fulner's eyes, the slight shift in Bryce's posture, and the anxious glance Miss Williams exchanged with him. Poirot's presence in the room was commanding, and each suspect knew that they were under his scrutiny. Before we proceed, Poirot continued, his gaze moving over the group, let us review the facts. Sir Edmund, a man with many secrets, was found dead in his study. The cause of death was a single precise stab wound to the chest. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. The room was locked from the inside, suggesting the involvement of someone who knew the house well. He paused again, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the room. The suspects are many, but the truth is always elusive, hiding beneath the surface of appearances. We must dig deeper, examine the psychology of those involved. And so we shall. Poirot's sharp eyes settled on Colonel Fulner, who had been avoiding eye contact. Colonel Fulner, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Let us begin with you. You have served with distinction in the army, and yet you seemed to be hiding something you were close to. Sir Edmund, were you not Fulner? Stiffened at the mention of his name. His jaw tightened, and for a moment he remained silent, as though weighing his words carefully. Finally he spoke, his voice low and guarded. Sir Edmund and I had a complicated relationship. We were friends once, but it was no secret that we had our differences indeed, Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. But what about your recent interactions? The tension between you and Sir Edmund was palpable during our interview. There was a sense of something unresolved, something you did not wish to speak about. Fulner's face flushed, but he quickly masked it with a scowl. I don't know what you're implying, Poirot, but I assure you I had no reason to harm Sir Edmund. Yes, we had our disagreements, but that's all they were. Disagreements between men who had known each other for years. It was nothing more. Poirot did not reply immediately. Instead, he let Fulner's words linger in the air. The Colonel's reaction was exactly what Poirot had expected, a mixture of defensiveness and subtle guilt. But it was not enough. Poirot needed more. Very well, Poirot said, his voice calm. Perhaps we will revisit this matter later. Let us move on for now." His gaze shifted to Bryce, who had been watching the exchange with a detached interest. Mr. Bryce Poirot continued, "You were Sir Edmund's business partner. You both shared a lucrative venture. But I wonder, Mr. Bryce, what exactly was the nature of your relationship with Sir Edmund? What terms did you agree upon that could lead to such an outcome?" Bryce's smile never wavered, but Poirot could see the tension in his eyes. "You're quite the inquisitor, Poirot," he said with a slight chuckle. "I can see why Sir Edmund found you so irritating." Poirot did not react to the barb. "It is not my intention to irritate Mr. Bryce, but to understand you. See, I have learned much about your business dealings with Sir Edmund, and I must admit they are quite curious. Why would a man of Sir Edmund's wealth and status become involved in such shady investments? And why, I ask, did he hide them from his friends?" Bryce's expression faltered for a brief moment before he regained his composure. "You don't understand the complexities of business, Poirot," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Sir Edmund had his reasons, and as for what happened between us, well, let's just say he made some decisions that I did not approve of. That's all Poirot could sense, that Bryce was hiding something. But the man was skilful in his evasion. Poirot pressed on, knowing that he would eventually uncover the truth. Then perhaps you would care to explain." Mr. Bryce Poirot said, "Why you were so eager to deny any involvement in Sir Edmund's financial troubles. You have claimed that you had nothing to do with his death, but your actions tell a different story. You were the last person to see Sir Edmund alive. Were you not?" Bryce's face hardened and his jaw clenched. "I don't know what you're talking about," said his voice, rising slightly. "I have nothing to hide." Pooh did not flinch. His eyes were steady, unyielding. "We shall see, Mr. Bryce. We shall see," turning his attention to Miss Williams. Poirot's expression softened. "Miss Williams, you have been most forthcoming in our conversations. Yet I feel there is something more you have yet to tell me. Perhaps you too know more about Sir Edmund's dealings than you have shared. I urge you, in the interest of justice, to tell me everything you know." Miss Williams's eyes flickered nervously, but she met Poirot's gaze with resolve. "I have already told you what I know," she said, her voice steady but strained. "But if you think there is more to it, then you must be right. Sir Edmund had been very secretive about his business. I know that he had made some investments with Bryce, dangerous ones that put him in debt. But he never told me the full story. I only found out when I overheard a conversation between him and Bryce one night. But I didn't catch all of it." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the new information that is very helpful. "Miss Williams, you have given me a vital clue. But there is still one thing I do not understand. Why would Bryce resort to murder? What could Sir Edmund have known that was so damaging that it would push him to kill Miss Williams?" Hesitated before answering. "I don't know, Miss Poirot, but I do know that Sir Edmund was very afraid. He was afraid of Bryce, afraid that Bryce would take everything from him, and he had no choice but to act first before it was too late." Poirot looked down at the table, his fingers tapping lightly against the wood. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. Bryce had been cornered, and Sir Edmund had discovered something about him, something that threatened to ruin his carefully constructed world. But what was it? Poirot's eyes lifted, his gaze sharp and focused. "There is one final question, Madame Monsieur," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "Who among you is hiding the most dangerous secret? Who among you had the most to gain from Sir Edmund's death? The answer, as always, lies in the little grey cells, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall uncover it." Chapter 27. The gathering storm. The shadows lengthened across Belvoir House as the evening drew near. The crisp air outside contrasted sharply with the stifling tension that filled the rooms. It had been days since Poirot had gathered the guests for their tense meeting, and though he had made progress, there was still something that eluded him, something hidden in plain sight. The detective could feel it in his bones, that sense that he was on the verge of something monumental. But he was yet to uncover the full truth inside the study. Poirot sat alone at the oak desk, carefully reviewing his notes, every detail, every word spoken by the guests, every clue. He had catalogued them all. He examined the guests' alibis, their interactions with Sir Edmund, their motives and their pasts. The more he considered, the more complex the case seemed to become. But Poirot, with his unmatched mind, could not rest until he had unravelled the tangled web that lay before him. The butler, an elderly man named Mr. Gregory, entered the study quietly, his footsteps barely audible. He had been with Sir Edmund for years, ever since the old man's first days in Belvoir House. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice low and respectful, "the guests are assembled in the drawing-room. They are waiting for you." Poirot nodded without looking up from his notes. "Very well, Mr. Gregory. I shall join them shortly." With a last glance at his notes, Poirot stood and straightened his jacket. His mind was sharp, his thoughts crisp as he prepared for what was to come. This would be the final meeting. A meeting where the truth would be laid bare. A moment of reckoning. It was time to confront the guests once more, to dig deeper and expose the darkness they so desperately tried to keep hidden. The drawing-room was grand and imposing, its high ceilings and intricate tapestries, a stark contrast to the atmosphere within. The air felt thick with suspicion and dread. The guests had gathered in silence, each of them sitting tensely, waiting for Poirot's entrance. The once lavish warmth of the room seemed distant, now replaced by an uncomfortable chill that hung in the air. Poirot walked into the room, his steps measured and deliberate. His presence immediately commanded attention. The guests, each lost in their thoughts, turned to face him. Colonel Fulner stood by the window once again, staring out into the garden. Miss Caroline Williams sat at the edge of her chair, her fingers nervously tapping the armrest. Mr. Bryce was the only one who appeared calm, his hands folded neatly in his lap, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. It was as if he knew something that the others did not, something that Poirot was determined to discover. "Madame Monsieur," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "we have come to the moment of truth. The time has come for you all to answer for your actions, for your secrets, and for the death of Sir Edmund Warrington. I have gathered all the clues, all the pieces of this tangled puzzle, and now it is time to put them together." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Poirot's gaze swept over them, his eyes lingering for a moment on each person. It was clear that each one had something to hide, something they hoped Poirot would overlook. But he would not be deterred. I have spent much time analyzing the evidence. Poirot continued, his voice firm and confident, and I have come to a conclusion. The death of Sir Edmund was no accident, no random act of violence. It was a carefully calculated murder, orchestrated by someone who knew Sir Edmund music intimately. At this, Miss Williams shifted in her seat, her eyes darting nervously toward Mr. Bryce. Colonel Fulmer, too, seemed to stiffen, his jaw tightening. Poirot saw it all, every flicker of emotion, every subtle shift in posture. He could read them like an open book. But there is more to this story than just murder, Poirot said, his voice growing more intense. It is not only Sir Edmund's death that we must uncover, but also the motives behind it. What drove someone to kill him? What was the hidden truth that led to such a violent end? Poirot turned his attention to Miss Williams. Miss Williams, he said, his voice soft but commanding. You were close to Sir Edmund, were you not? You had a special relationship with him. You knew his business dealings, and yet you kept much of it to yourself. Why is that Miss Williams's face turned pale, and her fingers twisted together anxiously? She opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again, as if unsure of how to respond. Poirot's eyes never left her, and he could see the internal struggle within her. And I didn't know what Sir Edmund was involved in. She stammered. I had no idea about the extent of his dealings with Mr. Bryce. I only found out recently, after overhearing part of a conversation between them. Sir Edmund, he didn't want anyone to know. He was afraid, Mr. Poirot. He was afraid that someone would discover what he had done. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Afraid of whom? Who was it that Sir Edmund feared, and what had he done? Williams hesitated, clearly torn. He was afraid of Mr. Bryce, she said, her voice trembling. He said that Bryce had been pressuring him to take on more risks, to invest in dangerous ventures that could destroy him. But Sir Edmund, he had no choice. He was trapped. But turned his gaze to Mr. Bryce, who had been sitting quietly throughout the exchange. And you, Mr. Bryce? Poirot said, his voice steady, but filled with accusation. You were the one who led Sir Edmund down this path. You were the one who pushed him into these dangerous dealings, knowing full well that he was too proud to back out. You knew that Sir Edmund had something to lose, his reputation, his wealth, and you took advantage of it. Bryce's calm demeanour faltered for the briefest moment, his lips pressing together in a tight line. But he recovered quickly, standing up and facing Poirot with a cold smile. You don't understand, Poirot, he said, his voice low but firm. I never intended for it to end like this. Sir Edmund was a fool, a man driven by greed. I merely offered him opportunities. He chose to take them, to gamble his fortune away. And when things began to unravel, when the ice walls closed in on him, he panicked. He tried to back out, but it was too late. You admit then, Mr. Bryce? Poirot said, his voice unwavering, that you had a hand in Sir Edmund's financial ruin. Bryce's eyes flashed with anger, but he quickly masked it. I did what I had to do. Sir Edmund knew the risks, and he knew what he was getting into. But he made one fatal mistake. He decided to betray me, to pull out of our agreement. And that was something I could not allow. Pugh's mind raced as he processed this new information. Betrayal. This was the key. Bryce had felt betrayed by Sir Edmund's decision too. back out of their partnership, and in his mind it had sealed Sir Edmund's fate. But it was more than just financial ruin. Bryce had to have known something more, something deeper, something that Sir Edmund could use against him. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Poirot turned to Colonel Falmer, his eyes narrowing. "Colonel Falmer," Poirot said, his voice calm, "but cutting, you have been silent throughout all of this. But I know that you have more to say. You knew Sir Edmund better than anyone here, and you knew about the dangers he faced. What is it that you are hiding?" Falmer shifted uncomfortably, his fingers gripping the back of the chair. I knew Sir Edmund had made some bad decisions," he said, his voice tight. "But I never thought he would go this far. I never thought he would involve himself in such risky dealings. And when I tried to warn him, he dismissed me. He wouldn't listen." Poirot nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "But you knew he was in danger, and yet you did nothing to stop it. Why let him fall into the hands of a man like Bryce?" Fulmer's gaze shifted to the floor, and for a moment he seemed lost in thought. "I couldn't," he said quietly. "I couldn't. Sir Edmund was a proud man. He didn't want anyone to know how far he had fallen. He wouldn't have listened even if I had tried." Poirot looked at each of them, Miss Williams, Bryce, and Fulmer. The truth was now clear. It was a tale of betrayal, pride and greed, all culminating in Sir Edmund's tragic death. But even though Poirot had uncovered the lies and the secrets, one question remained. Who had struck the fatal blow? The storm was gathering, and the final revelation was about to unfold. The web of deceit was about to unravel. And in that moment, Poirot knew the truth would come to light. Chapter 8. The final piece. The storm outside Belvoir House had become fiercer. The wind howling through the estate, rattling the windows and casting eerie shadows across the grand halls inside. The guests had retreated to their rooms, still shaken by the revelations Poirot had uncovered. But in the study, Hercule Poirot remained undeterred, his sharp mind working relentlessly to put together the final pieces of the puzzle. He had learned so much, but he still needed one last revelation, one final piece that would bring everything into focus. Poirot sat at the desk, his fingers steepled together as he thought. The walls of the study seemed to close in around him as he considered each of the clues. Sir Edmund's financial ruin, his relationships with Bryce and Miss Williams, the betrayal, the fears and the warnings. The murder was no accident, but the question of who had struck the fatal blow and why remained unanswered. He could see all the threads laid before him, but one of them remained tangled. The clock on the mantel ticked away. The seconds as Poirot's mind raced through the details. There was something missing, something he had overlooked. He knew that he had gathered all the evidence, but the motive remained elusive. Sir Edmund had been a man of pride and ambition. Yes, but what had pushed someone to kill him in cold blood? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Poirot rose from his chair, his mind still racing. "Enter!" He called, his voice calm but expectant. The door opened slowly, and Mr. Gregory, the butler, stepped inside. His expression was tense, and his usually steady hands trembled slightly as he closed the door behind him. Poirot, he began, his voice strained. "There's someone here to see you. It's urgent." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Who is it, Mr. Gregory?" "It's Miss Caroline Williams, sir," the butler said, glancing over his shoulder, as if to ensure they weren't being overheard. "She insists that she must speak with you immediately." Poirot's curiosity piqued. Miss Williams had been an enigma throughout the investigation. Beautiful, composed, and yet hiding something, her role in Sir Edmund's life had always seemed more complex than she had let on. Pooh had assumed she would remain silent now that the heat of the investigation was bearing down on the other guests. But it seemed she had one last secret to share. "Very well," Poirot said, motioning for Mr. Gregory to bring her in. "Let her come in." A moment later, Miss Williams entered the study, her face pale and her eyes red, rimmed as though she had been crying. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by an unsettling vulnerability. She walked toward Poirot, her footsteps hesitant, and paused just a few feet from him. "Is something wrong, Miss Williams?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but steady. He had learned long ago that beneath every layer of fear there was often a truth waiting to be uncovered, and he had a feeling that this moment would bring that truth into the light. Miss Williams took a deep breath and looked down at the floor, as though gathering the courage to speak. I can't stay silent anymore, Poirot," she said, her voice shaking. "I've been lying to you, lying to everyone, and I don't know how much longer I can carry this guilt." Prue's eyes narrowed, his interest piqued. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. "What is it that you wish to confess, Miss Williams?" She trembled slightly, but met his gaze. "I knew that Sir Edmund was in danger," she said. "I knew that he had made enemies, but I didn't know the full extent of it until the night before he died. The truth is, I was the one who overheard the conversation between Sir Edmund and Mr. Bryce. I knew that Bryce was threatening him, that he had pushed Sir Edmund to the edge. But I didn't warn him. I didn't do anything." Pugh's mind raced as he processed this new revelation. The puzzle pieces were starting to come together. Miss Williams had known more than she had let on, but her guilt ran deeper than simply withholding information. "But that is not all, is it?" Poirot asked, his voice steady, yet pressing for the truth. Yet pressing for the truth. Miss Williams looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "No," she whispered. "There's more. Sir Edmund was going to back out of his business dealings with Mr. Bryce. He had made up his mind. He was going to break the agreement, and that's why he was killed." Poirot's brow furrowed. But why would Mr. Bryce kill him? Surely there was another way to deal with the situation. To force Sir Edmund's compliance, killing him would solve nothing. "That's the thing," Miss Williams said, her voice barely audible. "Bryce wasn't just trying to pressure Sir Edmund. He was trying to stop Sir Edmund from revealing what he had learned about him. You see, Sir Edmund had uncovered something about Bryce, something dangerous. Bryce wasn't just a businessman. He was involved in far worse things. Sir Edmund had discovered that Bryce was laundering money through his investments, funneling it into criminal enterprises. And Sir Edmund had been gathering evidence to expose him." Poirot's eyes widened, the pieces falling into place with alarming clarity. So Bryce killed Sir Edmund to protect himself from being exposed. He said more to himself than to Miss Williams. "But you say Sir Edmund had already decided to back out of the agreement. He was going to reveal Bryce's crimes." "Yes," Miss Williams confirmed, nodding. "But Sir Edmund didn't realize how far Bryce would go to protect himself. He thought he could control the situation, but Bryce was far more ruthless than he ever imagined. Poirot rose from his seat, his mind working furiously as he pieced together the web of lies, betrayal and danger that had surrounded Sir Edmund's death. Bryce had killed Sir Edmund to protect himself from being exposed as a criminal. But there was still one more question to answer. How had Bryce carried out the murder? "Miss Williams Poirot," said his voice now calm and authoritative, "tell me more about that night. The night Sir Edmund died, were you in the house?" "At the time I was," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I was in my room when I heard the noise." A loud crash followed by silence. I didn't know what to think at first, but then I heard footsteps, heavy footsteps, as though someone was walking away from Sir Edmund's study. Pugh's thoughts were racing. He knew that the killer had been careful, but now he had a crucial piece of information. The footsteps. Did you see anyone? Miss Williams, did you recognize the person who left the study? Miss Williams hesitated before speaking. "No," she said, "I didn't see anyone. But I did hear something else, something that I didn't understand. At the time, a low voice, speaking to Sir Edmund. It wasn't Mr. Bryce's voice. It was someone else's. Pugh's mind clicked. The voice. The killer hadn't been Bryce alone. There was someone else involved. Someone who had yet to be revealed. Poirot was on the cusp of discovering the final truth. "Who was it, Miss Williams?" Poirot asked, his voice low and intent. "Who was the second person but Miss Williams?" Shook her head. "I don't know. I couldn't tell. All I heard was the voice and then silence. It was too late." Poirot's heart raced as the final realization struck him. The second person, the one who had helped Bryce kill Sir Edmund, was closer than anyone could have imagined. It was someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along, who had played their part in Sir Edmund's demise without ever showing their true nature. Poirot knew who the killer was. He turned toward the door, his mind made up. "I know who did it," he said, his voice firm, cutting through the air like a knife. "And it is time to bring this to an end." Chapter 9. The unmasking. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the grand walls of the drawing-room. The guests assembled. Intense silence seemed to hold their collective breath. All eyes now focused on the figure who had stood at the center of their turmoil, the brilliant detective Hercule. His presence was commanding a force of nature that had captivated each of them at different moments over the course of the investigation. But now it was clear that the time for speculation was over. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Pugh's sharp gaze swept over the room, taking in the faces of those who had surrounded Sir Edmund Warrington in life, and now in death. There was Mr. Bryce, his face pale, his features drawn in the kind of tightness one might expect from a man cornered. Miss Caroline Williams, her elegance still intact, but her eyes betraying an undercurrent of nervousness, standing rigid with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Then there was the quiet yet watchful Lady Marguerite, who, despite her outward composure, was clearly struggling with the burden of secrets. The other guests, the less immediately important, wore expressions ranging from suspicion to disbelief. Poirot, however, seemed entirely unfazed by the weight of their stares. He was a man who had over many years perfected the art of reading people, of unmasking the lies hidden beneath carefully crafted exteriors. But what intrigued him most was the feeling he had that there was still a thread to pull a final revelation. He had yet to uncover the truth knew would never be as simple as the one they had all presumed. After a moment of deliberate silence, Poirot spoke. "It is time," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The case has been most puzzling. None but I have seen through the veil of lies. Every piece of evidence, every word spoken, has led me to this conclusion. I shall now reveal to you the truth about the murder of Sir Edmund Warrington." At the mention of Sir Edmund's name, a collective shiver seemed to pass through the room. Poirot observed them carefully, watching, as their faces betrayed just the slightest flicker of fear, uncertainty, or guilt. It was a telling sight. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension. Poirot stepped forward, his every movement precise. "I will start at the beginning," he continued, "because, as you know, every crime has its origins, its roots. And those roots often lie deep within the very people who are closest to the victim. Sir Edmund Warrington, as you know, was a man of great ambition. He was driven, perhaps too driven, by his need to maintain his wealth, his status, and his control over his business affairs. This, I believe, is what led him to a path of dangerous decisions, ones that would ultimately seal his fate." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. The room was deathly silent, all eyes on him. Sir Edmund's dealings with Mr. Bryce were on the surface, business as usual, but beneath that something far more sinister was at play. Sir Edmund, as you recall, had uncovered Mr. Bryce's criminal activity, money laundering, financial fraud. Perhaps even worse, Sir Edmund had gathered enough evidence to ruin Bryce's even worse, Sir Edmund had gathered enough evidence to ruin Bryce's entire empire. And this is where things became clear. Bryce, despite his calculated calm, was desperate, and a desperate man will do anything to protect himself. Poirot turned toward Bryce, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Bryce, you were the first suspect, and rightfully so. You had the motive, and you were the one who stood the most to lose from Sir Edmund's revelations. But as I examined the case more closely, I realized that you were not acting alone. No, you had help, someone who understood you, someone who shared your desire for self-preservation." The guests in the room shifted uncomfortably, casting furtive glances at one another. Poirot did not miss the subtle gestures, the way Lady Margaret's hands trembled, or the way Miss Williams's mouth tightened. They knew that they were not yet willing to acknowledge it. Poirot's voice grew softer as he continued. "The first clue came from the timing of the crime. Sir Edmund's murder occurred just after he had made the decision to back out of his dealings with Mr. Bryce. It was perhaps an impulsive decision. He had not yet fully realized the danger he was in. But what he failed to understand was that the danger was already upon him. And that is where the second person comes in." At this, Poirot turned his gaze to Lady Margaret. The room fell utterly silent. Lady Margaret straightened her gaze, unwavering. Poe's voice, ever so calm, broke the stillness. "Lady Margaret, it is you. You are the second person. You are the one who helped Bryce, the one who aided him in carrying out the murder of Sir Edmund Warrington." A gasp echoed through the room. The tension became unbearable. Every eye in the room was fixed on Lady Margaret, but she did not flinch. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. As if trying to control her emotions for a long moment, she did not speak. Then slowly she lowered her head. "You are wrong, Miss Poirot," she said in a quiet voice, her words laced with a mixture of defiance and sadness you do not understand. "I had no choice." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "No choice? Is that what you tell yourself? That you were somehow forced into complicity? But you were not innocent in this, Lady Margaret. No, I believe you were more than just an accomplice. You were a willing participant." She swallowed hard but remained composed. "You do not understand. Sir Edmund was not the man you think he was. He was cruel. He treated me like an object and ornament for his social gatherings. I married him because of his wealth. Yes, but I never loved him. He never truly saw me for who I was." Poirot studied her carefully, his sharp eyes never leaving her face. "But that is not enough reason to murder a man. There must be more." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "There was more, Miss Poirot. Sir Edmund had discovered something about me. Something terrible he had found out about my past. He knew I had been married before he knew that I had been involved in a scandal. He threatened to expose me to ruin my reputation, and when he realized that I was no longer of use to him, he planned to dispose of me, just as he had done with others. He had grown tired of me." Poirot's expression softened. "But only for a moment. He was a man who understood the depths of human emotion, but he also understood justice. So you killed him to protect yourself. But why involve Mr. Bryce? Why not confront Sir Edmund alone?" Margaret's eyes flickered with something darker, a hidden rage that seemed to leak out despite her best efforts to contain it. "Because I was afraid, Mrs. Poirot, and Mr. Bryce, he was my confidant. I confided in him about Sir Edmund's threats, and he offered me a solution. He promised that he could make everything go away. He promised me freedom." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice growing more pointed. "And so you made an alliance with Bryce, an alliance that would lead to murder. But why not simply kill Sir Edmund yourself? Lady Margaret, why leave it to Bryce?" Lady Margaret's eyes darkened. "I was too frightened. I needed someone to do it for me. I couldn't bear the thought of taking a life myself. But I knew Bryce was capable. He had done worse things before." Poirot's eyes flashed with understanding. "Indeed, Bryce, the man who would do anything to protect his own skin. And Lady Margaret, the woman who would do anything to protect hers, a perfect match at this." Miss Williams stepped forward, her voice trembling. "But I heard them. I heard Lady Margaret's voice the night Sir Edmund died. She was the one who convinced Mr. Bryce to do it." Lady Margaret's eyes widened in horror. But Pooh held up his hand to silence her. "No need for further lies, Lady Marguerite. You cannot deny the truth any longer." Your guests looked on in stunned silence for a long moment. The room was eerily quiet. Poirot glanced around at each of them, his sharp eyes catching every small movement, every subtle gesture. He had unraveled their secrets. He had exposed the lies, the deceit, and the violence that had led to Sir Edmund's death. Finally, Poirot stood and turned to face the others. "The game is over," he said, his voice calm but final. "The truth has been revealed." And so it was. The murderer stood before them, exposed and unmasked. Chapter 10. The last clue. The first light of dawn broke through the heavy curtains, casting a soft glow across the grand hallway of the manor. The atmosphere was no longer one of tension but of quiet resolution. The truth had been revealed, and yet the room still felt unsettled, as if the shadows of the past refused to let go. The guests had long since departed, leaving behind only the faint echoes of their footsteps. Marguerite had been taken away by the authorities, and the remnants of Sir Edmund Warrington's world. The secrets, the lies, the betrayals now lay exposed. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the room where Sir Edmund had been found. His keen eyes scanned the space once again, as if searching for that one final piece of the puzzle that might elude him. The case was closed, and justice had been served. But Poirot's mind, ever the meticulous detective, could not yet allow himself to rest. There was something nagging at him, something that still felt incomplete. He paced slowly across the room, his polished shoes tapping lightly against the wooden floor. His fingers drummed a quiet rhythm on the edge of the fireplace. The flames now reduced to smouldering embers. Poirot's mind was sharp-focused on the smallest details, details others might overlook, but not him. He could feel it, the ever-present sensation that the last clue was just beyond his grasp. Poirot turned his attention to the desk in the corner. There, neatly arranged on the surface, were a collection of papers, business contracts, and ledgers, letters. All of them were relevant to the investigation in some way, but none seemed to provide the breakthrough he needed still. Poirot approached the desk, his curiosity piqued. It was not the contents of the papers that interested him, but the placement of them. They were arranged too neatly, as though someone had made a conscious effort to tidy up before leaving. Sir Edmund had been meticulous, but he had also been a man who operated in a world of disorder, chaos, and moral ambiguity. This small detail stood out. Poirot picked up a letter, scanning the elegant handwriting that adorned its surface. It was an invitation. No, a summons addressed to Sir Edmund from an old acquaintance, someone whom Poirot had not yet investigated thoroughly. The name on the envelope was familiar, but Poirot could not place it immediately. He carefully opened the letter and began to read. "My dear Sir Edmund, hope this letter finds you well, though I imagine that our business is less than pleasant. We have both come to the realization that the path we've chosen cannot continue without consequences. The time has come to settle our debts, and I trust that you understand the gravity of the situation. We shall meet on the evening of the full moon, where we last spoke of such matters. Do not disappoint me again, Sir Edmund, for I will not be as forgiving this time. Yours sincerely." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The letter was cryptic, but the tone was unmistakably one of threat. The phrase "settle our debts" caught his attention. It suggested a previous agreement, one that had not been honored, and one that now demanded payment. Poirot knew that this person, whoever A was, had he been a part of Sir Edmund's life in ways he had not yet revealed. There were connections here that Poirot had missed, and this letter seemed to be a key to unlocking the final mystery. He folded the letter carefully, his mind already racing with theories and possibilities. Who was, or what had been Sir Edmund's involvement in this business? The letter spoke of a meeting, a confrontation that had yet to occur. But Poirot's gut told him that the truth was right here. Hidden in plain sight, he turned to the window, gazing out at the sprawling estate. The garden, with its manicured hedges and perfectly trimmed trees, seemed almost serene in the early morning light. But Poirot knew that beneath this calm exterior lay a world of deceit and danger, a world that Sir Edmund had inhabited until his final tragic moments. Poirot's eyes landed on the distant woods that bordered the estate. There was something in the landscape that caught his attention. An old weathered structure hidden behind the trees. It was a small, secluded building, its roof barely visible through the branches. Poirot had not noticed it before, but now it seemed significant. His instincts told him that he needed to investigate it. As he made his way through the manor and down the path toward the woods, Poirot's mind remained focused on the unanswered questions that plagued him. The mystery of Sir Edmund Warrington's death was far from over. There was still a thread to pull, a final revelation that would complete the story, and Poirot, as always, was determined to find it. The woods were quiet, the only sounds being the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. As Poirot neared the building, he could see that it was indeed old, decades, perhaps centuries, its stone walls weathered by time. It appeared to be a small shed or storage building, perhaps once used for tools or supplies. But why had Sir Edmund chosen to keep such a place hidden on his estate? What was its purpose? Poirot approached the building cautiously, his steps careful and deliberate. The door was slightly ajar, as though someone had left in a hurry. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking with age inside. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the faint glow of the morning sun that filtered through the cracks in the walls. As Poe's eyes adjusted to the low light, he took in the room. It was sparse, with only a few items scattered about: a broken chair, a dusty table, some old crates. But then, in the far corner of the room, something caught his eye. It was a chest, locked and covered in dust. Poe stepped closer, his heart beating slightly faster. This was it. This was the final clue. He knelt down beside the chest, inspecting the lock. It was old, but it was sturdy. Definitely not the kind of lock Sir Edmund would have used lightly. Poirot ran his fingers over the surface of the chest, searching for any distinguishing marks or symbols that might offer a clue as to its contents. And then, as he ran his hand over the wood, he felt it, a small, subtle indentation on the side of the chest. With a knowing smile, Poirot retrieved a small, intricate key from his pocket, a key that had been given to him earlier in the investigation. The key fit perfectly, and with a soft click, the chest opened inside. Poirot found what he had been hoping for: evidence that would finally tie everything together. It was a collection of documents, some of which were familiar from Sir Edmund's desk. But among them was a new letter, one written in the same elegant script as the previous one. The letter was addressed to Sir Edmund, but this time the signature was not A. It was something else entirely. Poirot's eyes scanned the contents of the letter. Quickly, it was a threat much like the previous one, but this time it was more direct. The author had been watching Sir Edmund closely, monitoring his every move. And in this letter it was revealed that the man who had been blackmailing Sir Edmund, the one who had threatened him with exposure, was none other than Chapter 11, The Unravelling Truth. Poe stood in the shadow of the old building, the damp chill of the morning air creeping through his coat. His fingers still rested lightly on the edge of the chest, his mind racing with the implications of the letter he had just uncovered, the final piece of the puzzle. The last vital clue had been revealed, and yet Poirot knew that it was not enough to simply solve the mystery. The truth must be laid bare, every deception exposed. For all to see, the letter in his hand was no longer a mere cryptic message. It was a confession of sorts, the name. At the end, the signature that had been hidden in plain sight tied everything together with an elegance Poirot had come to expect from the most complex of cases. It was a name that had slipped from the mouths of many suspects, but never with the clarity that Poirot had now achieved. But this letter, with its dark promises and veiled threats, was not just a message. It was the key to understanding the deadly game that had been played. It revealed the identity of the person who had manipulated Sir Edmund Warrington into a web of lies and betrayals. It was a name that held a power over the entire investigation. And as Poirot turned the letter over in his hands, he realized that it was now his task to bring this final piece into the light. He glanced back toward the manor, its silhouette framed by the rising sun. The answers were waiting for him within those walls. But the truth of Sir Edmund's murder, of the crimes that had led to it, was not yet fully revealed to uncover it. Poirot would have to confront the very people who had woven the threads of this tangled story, and he would do so with the careful precision of a man who trusted only his mind, his little grey cells, to guide him. It was some hours later when Poirot finally gathered the suspects in the drawing-room, the final confrontation just moments away. The tension in the air was palpable, a quiet undercurrent that hummed beneath the surface of polite conversation. The guests who had once arrived in their elegant attire and poised manners now sat in uneasy silence, their eyes darting toward one another. They knew, as Poirot had known, that something crucial was about to unfold. The room, bathed in the warm light of the afternoon sun, seemed almost too peaceful for the storm of truth that was about to erupt. Poirot stood by the grand fireplace, his back straight, his face the picture of composure. He had been calm and methodical throughout the investigation, never once losing his temper, never once allowing his emotions to cloud his judgment. But now, as he looked out at the people who had surrounded Sir Edmund Warrington in his final days, Poirot's sharp eyes flicked from face to face, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the tightness around the eyes, the trembling of fingers that gripped the edge of a chair. "Messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the silence with the precision of a scalpel. "It is time for us to reach the end of our little game. You have all played your parts well. But as I have said before, the truth cannot be hidden forever." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in every person in the room. Lady Margaret, her second husband Charles, the loyal but nervous housekeeper, Mrs. Fenton, the ambitious young lawyer, Philip Martin, and the ever-watchful maid Agnes, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the quiet intensity that only he could summon. "I have gathered all the facts, examined every piece of evidence, and carefully observed each one of you, but it is not the evidence alone that reveals the truth. It is the mind, the understanding of human nature. The little grey cells, as I so often remind you, Poirot." "What are you saying?" Charles Warrington asked, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. His eyes flicked toward his wife, Lady Marguerite, who had grown pale at Poirot's words. "This is madness. You cannot possibly know the truth." Poirot's lips curled into a thin smile. "But, monsieur, I do, and so do you. It is only a matter of piecing the truth together layer by layer. And now it is time for the final revelation." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the letter he had found in the chest. The one that had been signed with the mysterious A. The room fell into a deep silence as Poirot held the letter up for all to see. The guests shifted uneasily, their eyes widening as they recognized the handwriting. Whoever A's, their game has finally come to an end. Poirot continued, his voice unwavering. But let me start at the beginning. He turned toward Mrs. Fenton, the housekeeper, who was seated near the fireplace. You, madam, are a woman of much more knowledge than you let on. You have worked in this house for many years, but your loyalty is not to Sir Edmund nor to Lady Margaret. It is to someone else. Someone whose identity I believe you have kept secret. Mrs. Fenton's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Poirot did not need her confession to know that she had been involved in the scheme, but her reluctance only confirmed his suspicions. Poirot turned to Agnes, the maid, who had been standing quietly in the corner. And you, mademoiselle, are not the innocent bystander you appear to be. You were in the room the night Sir Edmund was killed, but you lied about your whereabouts. Why did you lie, Agnes? What were you hiding? Agnes's face went white, and she glanced nervously at Lady Marguerite. Poirot interrupted her, his gaze piercing. No need for words. Mademoiselle, it is not your silence that reveals the truth, dear. It is your actions. You saw more than you let on, and you know far more than you've admitted. But it is not just you. The connection between you and the one known as A is more than mere chance. Turning to Charles, Poirot continued, his voice now filled with the authority of someone who had uncovered every last secret, and you have more to explain than anyone else in this room. You are the key to unlocking the entire mystery. You were not merely Sir Edmund's second husband. You were his partner in crime, his accomplice, his betrayer. You knew all along, didn't you? Charles's face drained of color, and he stood trembling. No, that's not true. You're wrong. Poirot stepped closer, his demeanor calm but resolute. But it is true. Monsieur, you had a hand in your own wife's first husband's demise. You helped to cover it up. You played your part, and when Sir Edmund threatened to expose you, you silenced him in the only way you knew how. Murder. The room seemed to close in on Charles as he staggered backward, his eyes wide with panic. Lady Margaret let out a soft cry. Her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Poirot took a step back, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. The truth has been revealed, and justice will be served. The question now is not whether you will be caught, but when. Chapter 12, the final reckoning. The silence that descended over the room after Poirot's revelation was profound. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The tension in the air was so thick it seemed as if it could be sliced with a knife. Poirot stood with his back to the room, his fingers lightly tapping the letter he had revealed just moments before. The faces of those around him were pale, their eyes darting nervously from one to the other, each one silently begging for some kind of salvation. But there would be no easy escape. No more false pretenses. Poirot had seen through every layer of their deception. The door to the drawing-room swung open with a soft creak, and in stepped Inspector Harris. He had been standing by waiting for Poirot to deliver the final piece of the puzzle. Before he could move in, the detective's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, the tense atmosphere thick with unspoken truths. Poirot, the inspector said in his low, growly voice. It seems we're nearing the end of this affair. Poirot turned to face the inspector, his expression as calm as ever. Though his mind was racing through the last few moments, he nodded. Once, acknowledging the inspector's statement, indeed, mon ami, the game is nearly over. But there is one last act to play. The room was still frozen in time. Each person locked in their thoughts, their fear of the inevitable clear on their faces. Poirot's sharp gaze swept the room once more. Before he spoke, his voice, calm but firm. "Let us return to the beginning," he said, his words cutting through the thick silence. "It was not a murder of passion that we witnessed. No, it was a cold and calculated act, a final, deliberate step in a larger scheme. But who was the true victim here, Lady Marguerite?" Her composure, faltering as she wrung her hands in her lap, looked up at Poirot. Her eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and fear. "You're accusing my husband," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Poirot's gaze softened as he met her eyes. "No, madame, I am not accusing your husband alone." His eyes flicked to the others in the room. "I am accusing all of you. Each of you played a part in this web of lies. But you, Charles, you were the orchestrator." Charles Warrington's face twisted in anger. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he stood, his voice rising with a mixture of rage and desperation. "Poirot, you're wrong. You don't know anything. I didn't kill him. I swear to you I didn't." Poot's eyes remained calm as he studied Charles's every move, his every word. There was no panic in his tone, no signs of guilt, only the defiance of a man who believed his secret was safe, even now. But Poirot was not fooled. "I have seen enough." Monsieur Poot said quietly, "You are no stranger to murder. You've already killed once, and you thought you could get away with it again." The room went deathly quiet once more. Charles stood frozen, his face. The picture of disbelief, his mind scrambled, trying to make sense of Poirot's words. But he knew deep down that the truth had finally caught up with him. Lady Margaret still, sitting, her face pale and drawn, spoke in a voice that trembled. "You mean to tell me that my husband killed Sir Edmund?" Her voice broke on the words, and she seemed to shrink into her seat, as though the weight of Poirot's accusation was too much to bear. Poot took a step toward her, his tone gentle yet firm. "Lady Marguerite, it was not just your husband's crime. The seed of this plot was sown long before Sir Edmund's death. You see, the story is not as simple as you might think." He turned toward the others in the room. "You all know that Sir Edmund was a man of great wealth of influence. His fortune, his connections, these were the very things that made him a target. But it was not his life that Charles sought to take. It was his fortune. The entire scheme, the entire plot was designed to remove Sir Edmund from the equation, to ensure that the money would flow into the right hands." At this, Charles's defiant facade began to crack. His eyes flicked nervously toward Lady Margaret, and then back to Poirot. But he said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. Poirot turned toward the other guests in the room. "You all played a part in this, knowingly or not. Mrs. Fenton, you knew what was going on. Agnes, you too knew more than you let on. You were all complicit in a scheme that was not merely about money, but about power. And once you realized that the end was near you, you took steps to cover your tracks. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fenton, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I didn't mean to get involved. It just happened. Woo. Shook his head, his eyes hardening with the weight of the truth. None of us ever means to be part of a crime, madam. Yet we all make choices, and it was those choices that led to Sir Edmund's death. Oh, please, Agnes, said her voice, trembling with fear. You don't understand. We were just trying to protect ourselves. Protect yourselves from what, Pooh? Asked his voice sharp. The truth has always been here. Mademoiselle, you simply chose to ignore it. As the weight of Poirot's words settled over them all, the room seemed to grow colder, the light dimmer. Poirot turned his attention back to Charles, who had yet to speak. Charles, you thought yourself clever. Poirot said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. You played the part of the grieving husband. But beneath that mask, you were a man driven by greed. You saw an opportunity and seized it, thinking that no one would ever uncover the truth, but you underestimated the power of the little grey cells. Charles's face contorted with anger. I didn't kill him. It wasn't me. Poirot took a step closer, his voice lowering, his words measured. And yet, Mizzy, your actions speak louder than any words you planned. Everything from the start, you were the one who manipulated the others, who set the stage for Sir Edmund's death. You thought you could get away with it, but the truth always finds a way to surface. The room was so still. It was as if time itself had stopped. Every person in the room was now fully aware of the consequences of Poirot's words. The lies, the betrayals, the manipulation, they had all been laid bare. Poirot turned to the inspector, who had been silently observing the scene. Unfold, Inspector. The time has come to take him into custody. Charles Warrington is guilty of the murder of Sir Edmund Warrington. The inspector nodded gravely, stepping forward to make the arrest. But before he could move, Charles's voice rang out once more, his words filled with desperation. No, you don't understand, he shouted. I didn't do it. I didn't kill Sir Edmund. It was. The door to the drawing-room suddenly burst open, and the figure of a man appeared in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. Wait! The man cried, his voice shaking. Wait, Poirot, I have to tell you the truth. Everyone turned to look, and Poirot raised an eyebrow in surprise. The man was someone Poirot had not expected to see. The man who had been thought lost to the past. Chapter 13. The unexpected confession. The unexpected visitor who had burst into the drawing-room stood frozen in the doorway. His appearance caught everyone off guard. His dishevelled clothes and frantic demeanour clearly betrayed the distress he was under. The moment his gaze met Poirot's sharp, calculating eyes, the man seemed to hesitate. The man seemed to hesitate, as if reconsidering his decision to speak at all. Poirot's expression was unreadable, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the stranger. His mind, as always, was in motion, trying to piece together what this sudden revelation could mean. The tension in the room was thick, as everyone waited in breathless silence, a collective anticipation hanging in the air. Ah, monsieur, nay, Poirot said, his voice smooth but firm. You wish to add something to our little puzzle, I see. But tell me, what is your connection to this crime?" The man, clearly struggling to maintain his composure, took a step forward into the room. His voice was trembling as he spoke. "My name is Simon Beale," he said, his words coming in rushed spurts. I was Sir Edmund's business partner. I've been in hiding for days, but I couldn't stay away any longer. I know who killed Sir Edmund." He gasped for breath, his eyes darting from Poirot to the others in the room as if fearing the judgment they might cast upon him. Pugh's eyes flicked toward the others present. Lady Margaret's face had drained of colour, and Charles Warrington's already tense posture seemed to tighten even further. Mrs. Fenton appeared to be clutching her hands together so tightly that her knuckles were white, while Agnes stared wide-eyed at Simon, as if unsure what to make of his sudden confession. Pugh's gaze shifted back to Simon Bale. "Please, monsieur, continue," he said, his voice still calm and measured. "You have come at an interesting time. We are very much in the midst of uncovering the truth. But tell me, what is it that you know?" Simon nodded, his lips trembling. He pulled a chair toward him and sank into it, as if the weight of his words had drained him of all his energy. Took a moment to steady himself before speaking again, though his hands shook visibly. "It was me," Simon said in a quiet voice. "I was the one who convinced Charles to." He paused and swallowed hard, his eyes flickering nervously around the room before continuing. "I convinced him to get rid of Sir Edmund." At this revelation, the room seemed to hold its breath. Poirot's mind raced through the implications of Simon's words, analyzing the motives and inconsistencies that might exist within his confession. Could it be true? Could Simon Bale be the mastermind behind the plot? Simon continued, his voice growing more agitated. I didn't want to kill him, but Sir Edmund was going to destroy me. Our business was failing. He wanted to sell off everything, leave me with nothing. He had already cut me out of the decisions he wanted to take over, everything for himself, and if he did that, I would be left with nothing. My life, my career, everything would be gone. Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Simon's face as he absorbed the information. A business partnership gone sour. Victorness. Poirot murmured, "Greed." Monsieur, the oldest and most predictable of motives. Simon's voice grew more desperate as he continued the weight of his confession, making him seem smaller with each passing second. "I couldn't let that happen. I tried everything, begged him to reconsider, to give me a chance. But Sir Edmund wouldn't listen. He was too proud, too arrogant. He thought he could ruin me and get away with it, so I did what I had to do. I talked to Charles. He was the only one who could help me. He didn't want the business either. You see, he was just as eager to see Sir Edmund gone, and I convinced him that it was the only way." Lady Margaret's eyes widened in horror, and she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Charles," she whispered, you were part of this." Her voice trembled as if the revelation had struck her with the force of a physical blow. She looked at her husband, her expression a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. Charles Warrington, who had been silently observing Simon's confession, remained motionless. His face was pale, his lips tight, and there was an almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he clenched it into a fist at his side. He said nothing, but the weight of his silence spoke. volumes. Poirot's gaze shifted between Simon and Charles, his mind clicking into place as he processed what had been said. "You see," Madame Poirot said to Lady Marguerite, his voice calm but firm, "it is not simply that Charles had a hand in the crime, it was his willingness to let Simon manipulate him into committing murder. Charles, monsieur, is a man of weak will, easily swayed by the promises of others. He was drawn into the plan not because of personal animosity, but because of his own selfish desires." Charles's eyes finally moved, his gaze darting around the room before settling back on Simon. He clenched his teeth. "It was just business," he muttered under his breath. "Just business. Edmund didn't care about any of us. He was taking everything for himself." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he assessed Charles's words. "Just business, monsieur. That is the excuse of a man who cannot face the consequences of his actions. It is not about business. It is about choices that you and Simon made together. You chose to kill him for your own gain. And now the truth has come out." Simon lowered his head in shame, his hands trembling on his lap. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt. But I thought if we just got rid of him, everything would be fine. I didn't think it would turn out like this." Poirot's gaze softened as he studied the man before him. "Ah, monsieur, that is the flaw in your thinking. You never consider the consequences of your actions until it is too late, and now you are paying the price for it." The room was heavy with the tension of the moment as everyone processed the full impact of Simon's confession. The truth was now laid bare, but even with the revelation, there remained a sense of unease. What did it all mean for the people in the room? What would happen to them now that the truth had come to light? Poirot stepped forward, his mind moving swiftly as he organized the pieces of the puzzle in his mind. "It is clear now. The roles each of you played. Poirot was the accomplice, the one who provided the means and the opportunity. Simon, you were the mastermind, the one who manipulated the situation to your advantage, and the rest of you." Poirot turned his gaze to the others in the room. "You are all merely pawns in the game, swept up in a web of lies and deceit. Some of you knew more than you let on, others were blinded by your own desires." He paused for a moment, letting his words hang in the air, before turning back to Simon. "But the truth has come to light, monsieur. The consequences of your actions are now inevitable. The law will have its say. Actions are now inevitable. The law will have its say." Inspector Harris, who had been quietly observing the unfolding scene, finally stepped forward. "You've heard it all, Q. The confession is clear. Simon Byle and Charles Warrington will be arrested for the murder of Sir Edmund." Simon nodded quietly, his head bowed in resignation. "I understand," he whispered, stood back, his expression unreadable. "It is a sad end, me. A tragedy of human folly, but the law must take its course." As the inspector moved to place the handcuffs on Simon, Lady Margaret stepped forward, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. What about me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Poirot gave her a measured look. "Madam, you are not without fault in this affair. Your silence, your failure to act, allowed this plot to go on far longer than it should have. But you are not guilty of murder. That responsibility lies with Simon and Charles. You have to live with your choices just as they must live with theirs. With that, the final chapter of this intricate web of deception was written. Simon Beale and Charles Warrington were arrested. Their fates sealed, the others in the room would carry the weight of their involvement for the rest of their lives, though. For most of them, the law would offer no consequences. Poirot stood by the door, ready to depart. His work was done before he left. He turned to look at the others. "One last time, remember," Madame Pou said too. "Lady Margaret the J. Truth always comes to light, no matter how deeply it is buried." Chapter 14. The Final Reveal. The air in the drawing-room was thick with uncertainty, yet the sense of finality was undeniable. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a gentle glow that seemed at odds with the tension in the room. Sir Margaret sat stiffly in her chair, her eyes fixed on the flame, as if it could offer her an escape from the chaos unfolding around her. Beside her, Charles Warrington stood, with his head bowed, his posture heavy with guilt across from them. Simon Beale was being escorted out of the room by the inspector, his eyes hollow and his steps slow, as if the weight of his confession had drained him of all life. But it was Poirot who remained at the center of attention. His calm, calculating demeanor had not wavered for a moment. He had solved the case, and yet even as the culprits were led away, there was an unsettling feeling in the air, as though something still lingered, something unresolved. Poirot turned to the inspector, his sharp eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a puzzle pieced together. But his mind still churned with the complexities that remained. "Inspector Harris Poirot," said his voice, smooth and measured, "the case is now clear, but I cannot help but feel that we are still missing one crucial detail." Inspector Harris looked up, his brow furrowed. "Missing a detail, Poirot? I thought the mystery was solved. Simon Beale and Charles Warrington are in custody. What more could there be?" Poirot gave a soft, enigmatic smile. "Ah, my friend, this is where the brilliance of a true investigation lies. We have solved the murder, yes, but there is more to this tale, a deeper layer that has yet to be uncovered." The inspector's skepticism was evident, but his curiosity got the better of him. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Poirot. "What are you suggesting, that someone else is involved?" Poirot's fingers lightly tapped against his chin, his eyes narrowing in thought. "Not necessarily someone else, but something else, you see. Every mystery leaves behind clues hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. And this case, my dear inspector, is no different." Lady Marguerite looked up at Poirot, her eyes filled with confusion. "What do you mean, Mr. Poirot? If Simon and Charles are the ones responsible for Sir Edmund's death, then why does it feel like there's more to this?" Poirot took a step forward, his gaze shifting from Lady Margaret to Charles. "It is because, madam, while Simon Beale and Charles Warrington may have played their roles in the murder, they were not the sole architects of the tragedy. There is another layer to this crime, a hidden hand that guided them, manipulated them." Charles shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting nervously. "What are you implying?" he asked, his voice strained. Poirot's expression softened as he addressed Charles directly. "Mr. Warrington, you were a willing participant in the crime, no doubt, but you were also someone who, in a moment of weakness, allowed yourself to be manipulated. You were not the only one with a motive. There was someone else who had as much, if not more, to gain from Sir Edmund's death. Lady Margaret gasped, her face pale. "Who could it possibly be?" "Poirot?" she asked her, voice shaking. Poirot turned his sharp gaze back to her, his eyes narrowing in on the subtle shift in her expression. "Ah, madame, there is the key. The person who had everything to gain, and yet remained in the shadows, hidden behind a veil of innocence. The one who perhaps could not let go of the past." A silence fell over the room. Lady Margaret's breath hitched in her throat, and Charles swallowed hard. His face now flushed with a mix of anger and fear. But it was Simon Beale whose fate had already been sealed, who looked the most perplexed. He had not yet been fully processed, and was still waiting in the hallway, his mind seemingly lost in the wake of his actions. Resensing the rising tension, took a step back and allowed the silence to envelop them. For a moment the crackling of the fire was the only sound that filled the space. Poirot's next words were deliberate, measured, and heavy with meaning. "The key to this case, Monsieur and Madame, lies not in the actions of Simon Beale or Charles Warrington alone, but into deeper history, a history that connects us all, history of betrayal, of unspoken truths." He paused again, looking between Lady Margaret and Charles, his gaze lingering on them, as though searching for the truth hidden beneath their carefully constructed facades. It was not just a business deal gone wrong. It was not simply greed that drove Simon and Charles to murder, no. There was something far more personal at play. A long-buried secret hidden from the world, but known to those who lived in this house. Lady Margaret's hand shook as she reached for her glass of water. But before she could take a sip, Poirot's piercing gaze caught her once more. "It was you, madame, who had the most to lose. Wasn't it you who had been married to Sir Edmund for so many years, who knew his every move, and yet lived in the shadow of his power? You were not an innocent bystander in all of this. You were a participant in the drama. Perhaps you did not pull the trigger, but you certainly helped to orchestrate the scene." Lady Margaret's lips parted, and she stammered, unable to speak for a moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. I don't know what you're talking about, Pooh. I have nothing to do with this." Poirot smiled softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Ah, madam, the truth often comes in whispers, you see. The truth is that Sir Edmund had a secret that involved someone close to him, someone who would benefit greatly from his death." Charles, still reeling from the direction the conversation had taken, stepped forward. "What are you saying?" Poirot, what secret? Poirot's gaze moved slowly to the far corner of the room, where a large portrait of Sir Edmund hung on the wall, his stern expression seeming to mock them all. "The secret, monsieur, is that Sir Edmund was not the man he appeared to be. He had been hiding a scandal, a disgrace that could ruin his name and legacy. The very thing that kept him in power, that allowed him to control those around him, was a carefully cultivated illusion. But that illusion, it seems, was about to crumble." Lady Margaret's eyes widened, and her face grew pale. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I didn't want any of this," she said, her voice cracking. "I never wanted any of this. But he wouldn't listen. He wouldn't give me a chance to be free. I was trapped. Poirot, trapped in a marriage that was suffocating me. Sir Edmund was a tyrant. He controlled everything, my life, my future, My every move, I couldn't take it any more. Poirot's eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. Madam, you did not have to resort to murder. There are always other options, other paths to freedom. You should have trusted in yourself, in your own strength, rather than in the deceit of others. Charles, his face now red with anger, snapped. You have no idea what it was like to live with him. Poirot said Edmund was a tyrant. He treated everyone like they were beneath him, including me. He ruined my life, took everything I worked for you. Think it was easy for me to do what I did? No, it was a choice. I had to make a choice between suffering in silence or taking control of my fate. Poirot shook his head. Monsieur, you were not alone in your suffering, but you chose a path that led to tragedy. And now the truth is, out there is no hiding from it. The finality of Prue's words echoed in the room. The truth was no longer something that could be concealed. The pieces of the puzzle had been placed together, and the image they formed was as clear as day. The crime was no longer a mystery. It was a tragedy, a series of choices made by people who were desperate, deceived, and ultimately destroyed by their own decisions. As the inspector prepared to lead Charles and Simon away, Poirot turned to Lady Marguerite, his expression softening. Madame, your role in this story is one of tragic consequences. You, too, will have to face what you have done. The law may not judge you as harshly as it will judge the others, but your conscience will remain your judge for the rest of your life. Lady Marguerite nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. I thought I could control it. But now I see the damage I've caused, the lives I've ruined. Poirot gave a small nod. Sometimes, madam, the greatest tragedy is the one we create ourselves. It is the consequence of our choices that we must live with. The room fell into silence, and as the last of the culprits were led away, Poirot stood quietly watching the final pieces of the puzzle fall into place. He had solved the mystery, but the story of betrayal, deception, and murder would linger in the hearts of those left behind. Chapter 15. Echoes of the fear passed. The storm had subsided, but the gloom in the mansion lingered. It was as if the very walls themselves had absorbed the secrets, the guilt, the lies that had unfolded within them. The once grand and imposing estate of Sir Edmund now seemed like a mausoleum housing not just the remains of the man who had once ruled it, but also the remnants of shattered lives. Lady Marguerite sat in the parlour, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of a porcelain teacup. Her once impeccable posture had softened, her elegant composure now replaced by a weariness that came from facing the truth. The very truth that she had tried so desperately to avoid. Charles, her former confidant, and now a man broken by his choices, was sitting across from her, his face drawn, his eyes tired and hollow. The weight of their actions had crushed them both. The room was silent, save for the occasional creaking of the house, settling the crackling of the dying embers in the fireplace. It was the silence of a place where things had once been alive, full of laughter and conversations. But now there was only an oppressive quietness that seemed to press down on everyone within. Poirot had left the mansion hours ago, his presence a lingering shadow that continued to haunt them. The inspector had gone with him, promising to return with more information regarding the case's final resolution. Yet, for all the certainty Poirot had shown, Lady Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out of place, that something important had been overlooked. She had always been a woman of control, a woman who prided herself on keeping her emotions in check. But now, in the wake of Poirot's revelations, her thoughts spun like a whirlwind. How had it all gone so wrong? How had she let herself fall so far? Her gaze drifted over to the window, where the pale light of the moon was beginning to break through the clouds. The mansion stood in the midst of the vast estate, its windows like cold, empty eyes staring out into the night. But even in the moonlight there was no comfort, no reprieve from the truth that had been laid bare. She could not escape the knowledge of what she had done. Charles cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Margaret," he began, his voice, "do you ever wonder if we could have done things differently, if we had just walked away, if we had chosen a different path?" Lady Margaret's eyes flickered toward him, but she said nothing. She couldn't find the words to answer him, not because she didn't want to, but because the reality of their situation was too overwhelming. "We were blinded by our own desires." Charles continued, his voice rising slightly. "I wanted power, and you wanted freedom. But we were both deceived. I never imagined it would end like this." She let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. "I never imagined it would end at all," she whispered. "I thought I could control it. I thought I could control everything." But now her voice faltered, and she clasped her hands tightly together, as if trying to hold herself steady against the emotional storm that threatened to consume her. Charles stared at her, his face twisted in a mixture of regret and guilt. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he said, his words almost bleeding. "I thought if I could just get what I wanted, everything would fall into place." "But it all fell apart, didn't it?" "Yes," Lady Margaret replied, her voice cold and distant. "It did." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The weight of their guilt hung heavy between them, a chasm they both felt, but neither knew how to bridge. It was a strange thing, this grief they shared. It wasn't just for Sir Edmund, but for the lives they had destroyed, for the trust they had shattered, and for the future they had stolen from themselves. The door to the parlour opened suddenly, interrupting the quiet moment. The inspector stepped inside, his face grim. Behind him was a young officer holding a folder. Lady Marguerite's heart skipped a beat. She had been hoping for some finality, some resolution, but the expression on the inspector's face made it clear that they were not yet free of the past. "Marguerite," the inspector said, his tone formal. "Charles, I've just returned from a final round of questioning. There are things you need to know, things that have come to light since Poirot left." Charles looked up sharply, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I thought the case was closed. We were done." The inspector shook his head slowly. "Not quite. It seems there are still some unanswered questions, Poirot. He was right. There was more to this than just your involvement. There's something else, something that hasn't been fully addressed." "Little." Marguerite stood up abruptly, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you talking about? What could possibly be left?" The inspector motioned for the officer to hand him the folder. He opened it, revealing a series of documents, photographs, and a set of notes. "We've learned that Sir Edmund was not just the victim of a simple crime of passion or greed. There's more to his death than we initially thought." evidence has come to light that suggests a far more intricate conspiracy was at play. Lady Marguerite took a step forward, her hand instinctively reaching out to steady herself on the back of a chair. What kind of conspiracy? The inspector placed a photograph on the table. It was a picture of Sir Edmund standing beside a man who at first glance appeared to be an associate or a business partner. But as Margaret looked closer, she realized there was something unsettling about the man's eyes. He looked familiar, but she couldn't quite place him. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That man," the inspector said, "is someone who had been in Sir Edmund's life long before you and Charles ever came into the picture. His name is Elias Hargrove. He was a former business associate of Sir Edmund, someone who disappeared from the scene years ago after a series of financial scandals." Charles's eyes widened. "Hargrove, the name sounds familiar, but I thought he was dead." "Not dead, just out of sight," the inspector replied, "and it seems he resurfaced recently. The documents we found suggest that Hargrove had been in ancient contact with Sir Edmund again, just before his death." Lady Margaret's mind raced. What does this mean? How does he fit into all of this? The inspector's expression grew darker. Hargrove had been blackmailing Sir Edmund. There was more to the financial troubles Sir Edmund had been dealing with than anyone knew he had been hiding. Debt deals gone wrong, and a series of criminal activities that could ruin his reputation if they were ever exposed. And it seems he was working with someone inside the mansion, someone very close to Sir Edmund. Lady Margaret's breath caught in her throat. "You think one of us was involved with him? That one of us was helping Hargrove?" The inspector nodded. "We have reason to believe that Sir Edmund's death wasn't just about money. It was about silencing him. Hargrove wanted to ensure Sir Edmund wouldn't reveal the secrets that could destroy them both." A chill ran down Lady Margaret's spine. "But how does that explain Charles and me? What role did we play in this?" The inspector looked at her gravely. "I believe you were both pawns in a much larger game. Hargrove had his eyes on Sir Edmund's fortune, but he knew he needed inside help to bring down the man who had kept him at bay for so long. He knew that Sir Edmund's pride and arrogance would make him impossible to control. So he used those closest to him, people who had their own motives, their own reasons to see him gone." Charles's face palled. "Are you saying we were manipulated, that we didn't know what we were doing?" The Maru inspector's gaze softened for a moment. "In a way, yes, you were both manipulated by your own desires, by your own need for freedom, for power. But Hargrove played you like pieces on a chessboard, and now, with Sir Edmund dead, he's disappeared again. But the trail doesn't end here. We need to find him." The room fell into silence again, the weight of the inspector's words settling over them like a heavy fog. Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her, feet the foundation of everything. She thought she knew about her life crumbling away. She had been a victim in all of this, yes, but so had Charles. They had both been caught in a web of lies spun by a man who had long since disappeared. But the truth remained: Sir Edmund was dead, and they were left to face the consequences of their actions. No matter how much they had been manipulated, the final piece of the puzzle had yet to be revealed. And until it was, Lady Margaret knew she would never find peace. Chapter 16. The Shadows of Betrayal. The mansion was quieter than ever, the echoes of their troubled past ringing through the empty halls. As the clock ticked toward midnight, a cold wind rustled through the trees outside its mournful wail, filtering through the cracks in the windows inside. All was still the grand estate that had once been the center of high society gatherings, now stood as a silent monument to betrayal grief. And the truth that no one could escape Lady Margaret sat at the writing desk in the study, her fingers resting lightly on the cold surface of the polished wood. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. She had spent hours poring over the files the inspector had left behind, her mind racing with the revelations he had brought. It had all begun to unravel so quickly. The lies, the betrayals, the people who had been part of a game she had never understood until it was too late. She could still feel the weight of Sir Edmund's death pressing down on her, the guilt seeping into her. Every thought had she truly been so blinded by ambition and desire that she hadn't seen what was happening. The truth, when it came, was more devastating than she could have ever imagined. Behind her, the door creaked open, and Charles entered the room. Chess' face was pale, his eyes sunken. The man who had once been her closest confidant now seemed like a stranger. He was man-broken, shattered by his own choices, and the two of them were left to pick up the pieces of a life they had both destroyed. "Marguerite," Charles said quietly, his voice strained, "have you found anything more?" She didn't answer right away, but instead turned, slowly meeting his gaze. For the first time in days, she saw the same despair mirrored in his eyes that she had been feeling in her own heart. It was as if they were two halves of the same broken soul, bound together by a tragedy neither of them could undo. "I don't know if I can stand much more of this," Lady Margaret said softly. "The more I read, the more I realized how deep the web went. I rove the debts, the schemes. I never suspected any of it. Sir Edmund was hiding so much more than I ever imagined. We were all part of it." Charles, even you, Charles, swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was doing what was best for us, for our future. I thought if we could just be free of Sir Edmund's control, things would be better." Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. "And now look at what we have. The control we fought for has only led us to ruin. You weren't the only one who was blinded, Charles. I was too. I was willing to risk everything. My name, my reputation, just to escape the confines of this place, and now everything is falling apart." Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, the weight of her words sinking in like a sharp blade. She had been so focused on her own desires, on the need to break free from Sir Edmund's grasp, that she hadn't seen the consequences of her actions until it was too late and there was no turning back. Charles stepped closer, his hand hovering at his side before finally resting on the back of a chair. "What do we do now? Marguerite, can we make this right? Can we ever be free of the mistakes we've made?" The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The answer seemed as elusive as the truth they had been chasing all along. How could they make things right when the damage was so vast? They had lost so much already. Sir Edmund, their futures, their peace of mind, what more was left to salvage? Poor Lady Margaret began, her voice trembling. He was so sure that we were only pawns. But what if he's wrong? What if Harrow didn't just manipulate us? What if we were the ones who manipulated him? What if we were just as much a part of this mess as everyone else? Charles's face contorted in confusion. What do you mean? How could we have manipulated him? She stood up, suddenly pacing, the room in agitation. Think about it. Charles Harrow was a businessman. He came back for one reason: money. He didn't care about Sir Edmund or me or you. He only cared about his own survival. And when he came to us, when he approached us with his schemes, we could have said no. We didn't have to get involved, but we chose to play his game. We thought we could outsmart him, use him for our own gain. Her voice was rising now, the anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. We thought we were in control, but we weren't. We were just as trapped as he was, and now we're paying the price. Charles stared at her in silence for a moment, his brow furrowing as he processed her words. Then slowly he nodded, his gaze falling to the floor. I see what you're saying. We weren't just pawns. We were complicit. We helped him destroy Sir Edmund just as much as he helped us. We played into his hands just like everyone else. Lady Margaret's heart sank as she realized the full scope of their actions. They had all been playing a game, and none of them had understood the rules. Sir Edmund had been the victim, but they too had been victims of their own desires, their own ambition. They had been blinded by their need to escape, to gain control, to take what they thought they deserved. But now, with the truth coming to light, there was no escaping the consequences. No matter how hard they tried to deny it, the truth was inescapable. Sir Edmund's death, their involvement with Harrow, the lies they had told it, had all led them to this point, and there was no way out. I think it's time we face the truth. Lady Margaret said, her voice trembling with emotion. We have to take responsibility for what we've done. If we don't, we will never be free. Not from the past, not from the guilt, not from anything. Charles nodded, his face pale. You're right. We can't run from this anymore. We have to face what we've done, no matter how much it hurts. There was a long silence between them, a silence filled with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. They had both known deep down that they couldn't escape the past forever. But now that the truth was finally out, there was no turning back. Suddenly the door opened again, and the inspector walked in, his expression grim. Marguerite, Charles, he said, his voice steady, but carrying an air of urgency. We have a lead. We've traced Harrow's movements. We know where he's headed next. But I need your help. I need both of you to come with me. We have to find him before it's too late. Lady Margaret's heart skipped a beat. Harrow, the man who had been the architect of their ruin, the one who had set everything in motion, the man who had manipulated them, deceived them, and led them down this dark path. He was still out there, still hiding in the shadows, and they had to find him. Where is he? Charles asked, his voice filled with determination. Not far, the inspector replied. We believe he's hiding in a place he knows well. A place that has been used before to shelter criminals in the past. It's time to bring this to an end. The urgency in the inspector's voice was enough to jolt them into action. The past had finally caught up with them, and there was no more running. The game was over. Lady Margaret took a deep breath. Steadying herself, the next few hours would determine everything. This was their final chance to make things right together. They followed the inspector out of the mansion into the cold night, with only the faint light of the moon to guide their way. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and uncertainty. But one thing was clear: they could no longer hide from the truth book. The time had come to face it and the consequences of their actions. Chapter 17. The Echo of Betrayal. The air was thick with tension as Lady Margaret and Charles followed the inspector down the winding path